Myles Garrett wants out of Cleveland, and the Rams are done with Cooper Kupp. Could either of them end up as Carolina Panthers this season? We'll talk about it on this weekly Friday mailbag edition of Locked On Panthers.
You are Locked On Panthers, your daily Carolina Panthers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into another edition of the Locked On Panthers podcast, a part of the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, as always, Julian Council, talking Carolina Panthers with you every Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and yes, of course, Friday. Your team every day. That's our motto here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Thanks for watching the show here on YouTube and listening wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. Be sure to follow me, Julian Council, over on Twitter at Julian Council. Why? Because on Fridays, like today, for the entirety of the offseason, I'm right here answering your weekly Friday mailbag questions. All you got to do is either at me or DM me over on Twitter at Julian Council to get your questions for next week's edition of the weekly Friday mailbag right here on Locked On Panthers. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. New customers can bet just $5, and if you win, you'll score $200 in bonus bets. Download the app or head to FanDuel.com to get started today. And we are only 2 days away from Super Bowl 59 down there in New Orleans. And, buddy, the Super Bowl has felt overshadowed all week long because of the trade buzz, not just in this league, but also in the NBA. On Saturday, it's midnight. I'm watching Gonzaga and St. Mary's, and next thing I know, my Apple Watch is going off, and Shams Charania is saying that Luka Doncic is going to be a Los Angeles Laker and Anthony Davis is going to be a Dallas Maverick. So a seismic trade there in the NBA. You also look at the Hornets making a couple of trades over the last couple of days. And then with the NFL, the big news on Monday, day one of the Super Bowl coverage, was not the Chiefs and the Eagles. It was Myles Garrett asking out of Cleveland. I was on with my guy, Tony Wiggins of Locked On Jags, who hosts the Barbershop on Locked On NFL. Been with him every Monday throughout the season, so check that out on Mondays. And we were about to record the show, and I'm like, oh, well, hey, actually, hold on. Adam Schefter just reported that Myles Garrett doesn't want to be a Brown anymore, and we talked about that on Monday, and then we found out later on this week that Cooper Kupp, the Rams are saying, we're good, man. You're making a lot of money, but you're not really producing to make the money, the contract justified, so we're going to move on. So there's been a lot of trade conversation in the NBA, in the NFL, that is not necessarily overshadowed, but has not made the Eagles and Chiefs game the central discussion among sports fans this week in America. And now, of course, on Sunday, we'll all be planning on watching Fox and seeing the Chiefs and the Eagles game. And maybe some of you are not that excited because you're sick Kansas City. So we'll see how it plays out. And this also was a matchup 2 years ago. Well, let's talk about those trades that are possibly coming. Certainly Cooper Kupp will be traded. Myles Garrett, there's still a lot that has to happen for Cleveland to be in a position to actually trade him. And the first question for the weekly Friday mailbag today comes over from Seth, who says, with the recent trade request of Myles Garrett and the Rams telling Cooper Kupp they are going to seek a trade, is it possible that the Panthers can make a play for either one of these players? Now, let's first focus on Myles Garrett in this segment. We'll take a pause, and then we'll talk about Cooper Kupp a little bit later on here on the show. But let's look at Myles Garrett. There are a few things that all of us have to consider when it comes to Myles Garrett potentially becoming a Carolina Panther and just the Browns in general trading away from Cleveland. It's not going to be simple for Cleveland, as number one, their salary cap situation is a disaster right now for a team that is drafting in the top 5 to be in this big of a mess and have players on high contracts like they have with Denzel Ward and like they have with guys like Joel Petonio and, of course, Myles Garrett, to be this bad and to be in this cap situation. Buddy, what is going on here currently? And this comes from Jason Fitzgerald of overthecap.com. He put out a really good article earlier this week. Maybe you read it, about teams, what they have to consider when it comes to a potential trade for Myles Garrett. But looking at the Browns' salary cap situation, currently the Browns are estimated to be $30 million over the salary cap and ranked fourth in the NFL, with 40% of their players with at least a $2 million cap charge, having a low P5 on the books, meaning they can't create cap room with those players. So they don't really have a lot of options to open up cap space, even right now with Myles Garrett on the roster. Garrett currently counts for $19.722 million on the cap, and a trade would leave the team with at least $36.2 million in dead money, a loss of $16.5 million in cap room. So right there, that kind of makes it on the surface a non-starter for Cleveland. They lose salary cap space by trading away Myles Garrett. And the Browns decided, let's wait to do everything in the offseason as far as the draft and as far as free agency, and then try to designate him as a June 1 cut or trade rather. It still wouldn't be that great for Cleveland, as they wouldn't benefit from getting compensation for this year's draft. Say, look at Carolina. They have the 8th overall pick. Cleveland's already drafting in the top 10. Having 2 top 10 picks would be very nice, but they wouldn't have that top 10 pick this year. They'd have to wait until next year, and hopefully Carolina's not drafting in the top 10 if that were going to be the case. So looking at that, if they do decide to do a post-June 1 designation, they wouldn't again benefit from compensation this year. There would be either a $15.6 million in dead money if the remainder of Garrett's bonus option was removed from the contract, or if it's not, $18.43 million of dead money for Cleveland, and they could try to offset the difference coming up in 2026. The team would then defer $25.5 million of dead money to 2026, when it would be easier rather to digest on the salary cap. So looking at it, like the team that acquires Myles Garrett, if he's traded in the summer after the draft, they would be responsible for $14.8 million this year and $25 million next year. And that is certainly not that sizable looking at what Cleveland has to incur if they decide to trade Myles Garrett. So the salary cap situation in Cleveland is FUBAR, if you know what that means. Like, it's beyond effed up for Cleveland to try and figure out what to do in this situation that Myles Garrett has now placed them in. Compensation, that's also something that's going to be key, as Carolina, looking at it right now, they own the 8th overall pick. They also own the Rams second rounder, which is going to be there in the late 50s. They have their own 3rd rounder, their own 4th, the Cowboys 4th. Thank you, Jonathan Mingo. Their own 5th, the Giants 5th from the Brian Burns trade, the Ravens 5th, and the Cardinals 7th rounder. Thank you, Robbie Anderson. So that's something to understand what the compensation Carolina has, and you don't want to give up a lot. You got that 2nd round pick because you trade away Brian Burns, and Dan Morgan did a really good job working with the Rams and their desperation to make sure they get Braden Fisk. And certainly it's worked out for Los Angeles, and we'll see whether it works out for Carolina. But Dan Morgan got that 2nd round pick back. Do you want to give it up again in order to get up there to get Myles Garrett? And given the nature of the trade request, and this is from Jason Fitzgerald of Over the Cap, the age of Myles Garrett, and the likely extension that will come with this, there's the doubt that the Browns would be looking at a massive haul of multiple 1st-round picks. They certainly should get 1 1st-round pick for him, but that is probably a mid-round pick with some kind of escalation conditions as well. So looking at a Diana Rossini tweet earlier this week, she was talking to someone who works in the front office in the NFL, and they were talking about what the compensation could be. And this was the quote, probably a 1+, can't wait for it will be 3 1s crowd, not happening. 1 and a 2, 1 and 2 3s, throw a player in there. So if Carolina wanted to make this trade, if it's going to cost a 1 and a 2, okay, well, there's your 8th overall pick, and in the 2nd round pick you got from the Rams. I don't know whether Dan Morgan is wanting to wait until the 3rd round in order to finally make a draft pick. And it's possible Carolina can trade up, get back in there to day 2, unlikely going to get back into day 1 if they make this trade. I don't know if he wants to have that big of a gap until they're making any sort of decisions as far as actually drafting players. Now, if it's going to be a 1 and then a 3, okay, you have your 2nd round pick there. It's still not that farther up from the 3rd round pick that you have, but it's better than having no picks until later on that Friday evening in the round 3s. That could be the potential compensation. As far as extension goes, the extension likely would be in the ballpark of $35 million. That's looking at the recent extensions to TJ Watt when Aaron Donald was still playing, Chris Jones as well, and probably 3 years. So $35 million a season and a 3-year extension. That is a significant investment. And understand this, what's coming down the pike for the Carolina Panthers. Well, you already paid Derek Brown last year. J.C. Horn likely getting extended this offseason. It would make the most sense to do it now. Don't mess around like they did with Brian Burns. And you can debate with your mama whether you felt like that was the right decision or not. We already talked about that last month when revisiting a trade. Either way, you're going to have to extend J.C. Horn. Then you look at other players like Ike Ekwonu. He's likely going to be getting a fifth-year option exercise this year. Then that's going to give Carolina maybe next year to extend him. Maybe they wait till 2027 to extend him. Bryce Young, if he keeps playing the way he played in the final 9 games of the season, he's going to get a monster contract. So you have to understand, it's not just, all right, you're going to extend and you're going to give up all this compensation for Myles Garrett. It's also Bryce getting paid a market value quarterback contract for a guy who's a first-round pick and would be the starter of your franchise. Carolina has not had to ever pay a quarterback the kind of money quarterbacks are getting paid nowadays in the NFL. So there's so many other players you have to be taken care of down the road and other positions of need. And this is obviously like the position of need. The edge rushers on this team, they leave a lot to be desired. And even though when you look at what Clowney signed for and what he actually provided to Carolina and how the numbers are pretty similar to what he did a year ago in Baltimore, he's past his prime. And you look at DJ, want to miss a lot of time. I do think there's something there, but neither one of those guys or have ever been or ever will be what Myles Garrett has been and will continue to be in the NFL. Like Clowney was supposed to be Myles Garrett. I've said this multiple times in the show. He's never been that, which is why I was saying he's more of a name than an actual difference maker. He's not a difference maker. And I question whether he ever was one in the NFL, especially considering all that we thought he was going to be coming out of South Carolina. But he was a solid enough player for Carolina this year, but they need a true difference maker at outside linebacker, at edge rusher, and that would be Myles Garrett. So that's something to consider as far as compensation. But the third one, and maybe the most important one, is can you convince Myles Garrett that the Carolina Panthers are legitimate Super Bowl contenders? Let's go back to his statement that he put out there on Monday, saying, quote, "As a kid dreaming of the NFL, all I focused on was the ultimate goal of winning a Super Bowl, and that goal fuels me today more than ever. My love for the community of Northeast Ohio and the incredible fan base of the Cleveland Browns has made this one of the toughest decisions of my life. These past 8 years have shaped me into the man that I am today. While I've loved calling this city my home, my desire to win and compete on the biggest stages won't allow me to be complacent. The goal was never to go from Cleveland to Canton. It has always been to compete and win a Super Bowl. With that in mind, I request to be traded from the Cleveland Browns." So again, while I've loved calling this city my home, my desire to win and compete on the biggest stages won't allow me to be complacent. The goal was never to go from Cleveland to Canton. It has always been to compete and win a Super Bowl. So this guy's been in Cleveland, one of the worst franchises in the NFL over the last 20 years, primarily losing. They went to the playoffs last year, lost in the wild card round. A couple years prior to that with Baker Mayfield, they went to the playoffs, won the wild card round, lost close one at Arrowhead to the Kansas City Chiefs when Chad Henne had to come in for a concussed Patrick Mahomes. So they were close to being right there on the doorstep of playing for a Super Bowl. But they really have not been that close in Cleveland. So Carolina would have to convince a man who's played for the Cleveland Browns for 8 seasons that this is a better situation when Carolina has not been to the playoffs in, let's see, didn't go in 24, didn't go in 23, didn't go in 22, didn't go in 21, didn't go in 2020, didn't go in 2019, didn't go in 2018. Okay, so it's been 8 years. 8 years. So let me see, has Myles Garrett been in the NFL and ever seen the Carolina Panthers go to the playoffs? Let me look back and see when he was drafted. He was drafted in 2017. So only once his rookie season has he seen the Carolina Panthers competing for a Super Bowl title. And now, after 7 years of mediocrity and Tepper tearing down this franchise, Myles Garrett had to be convinced by the Carolina Panthers that they're a Super Bowl contender. They're not. Let's not lie to ourselves. It's possible with the right moves this offseason and getting the defense just to be halfway decent that they could be absolutely a contender for the NFC South this upcoming season. But are they a contender to win the NFC? No, I don't believe that's the case. So that's certainly a lot better than currently what they have to offer as far as 5-12. Yes, quarterback look really good in the final 9 games, but still, if I'm Myles Garrett, and just looking at the facts of the situation, guys, the Carolina's not been in the playoffs since 2017, his rookie year. This would not be the place I would be looking to go to. And I'm not trying to say that to be disrespectful or to talk bad about the Panthers. It's just the facts. They have not been a playoff team since 2017. And that was his rookie year. So, like, what else do you want me to say other than tell you, yeah, absolutely, this is the place to go to? Maybe it is. And I saw Matt Harmon, who does stuff for Yahoo. He thinks the Panthers are going to win the NFC South, and love to hear that someone on the national level sees this team in that light. I appreciate it. And I did just tell you, with the right moves, they could absolutely be a contender for the NFC South. It's not like this division's that hard, and this is a different team than the one we saw in those first 8 games of the season. The last 9, I feel like that's more what we're going to see this upcoming season. Now you want to see some things improve, like the defense, and hell, who knows? Maybe they can be right in there with an opportunity to win the NFC South. I don't know. I have a hard time believing he'd leave Cleveland, say those words, and then come to Carolina. So we'll see. Those are just things to consider when thinking about a potential trade for Myles Garrett coming here to be a Carolina Panther. Would love to see it happen. Absolutely on board. Would love it. I just don't necessarily think right now, especially with the Browns salary cap situation, it's that realistic. Could be, but right now, I wouldn't count Carolina as the favorite in any of this. What about Cooper Kupp, though? Because that certainly may be an easier trade to make happen, considering the situation there in Los Angeles. We'll talk more about that here in just a moment on Locked On Panthers. This show is sponsored by BetterHelp. What do you want your 2025 story to be? Every January brings a new chapter, 365 blank pages waiting for you to fill. If there's a part of your life you want to rewrite or a plot twist you've been craving, why wait? Life isn't about fleeting resolutions. It's about taking control and becoming the author of your own story. Think of therapy as your personal editor, helping you craft the life you deserve. It's not just for crisis situations. Therapy can help you develop healthier coping strategies, improve your relationships, and empower you to be the best version of yourself. Whether you're facing a challenge or just looking for personal growth, therapy is a powerful tool to help guide your journey. Whether it's learning how to set boundaries or tackling stress in new ways, therapy can help you develop skills for a better tomorrow. And if you've never tried therapy, the benefits are clear. Finding someone to talk to and gaining fresh perspectives can make all the difference in how you navigate life's ups and downs. Write your story at BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOn today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOn. I contemplated this week whether to talk about the Myles Garrett potential trade situation here in Carolina earlier on, but then I thought, okay, the cap situation for the Browns it's a mess. So this is not something that was going to happen this week, not something that's going to happen next week, even the combine. Like, we're going to be waiting a while, and I do think it will probably be around April when, if there is a trade made, that Cleveland decides to do so. But right now, there's no real benefit to the Browns making this trade and leaving them in a situation where the cap is even worse than it is right now, and they're missing literally the best defensive player in the game. Like, that's another thing to consider. So we'll see how it plays out. Would love to see it happen. Just curious whether Cleveland is going to let Myles Garrett strong-arm them into doing it, and if this is the destination he wants to choose, considering he says his focus now is on competing to win Super Bowls. And one thing also to point out, it was never about going from Cleveland to Canton. That is actually a direct shot at the general manager up there in Cleveland, Andrew Berry, who did say that he wanted to see Myles Garrett one day go from Cleveland to Canton. So he's not focused on the Hall of Fame, which is where he's going. He's focused on trying to win a Super Bowl, which is what's going to happen on Sunday as the Eagles face off against Kansas City Chiefs down there in New Orleans. Myles Garrett, that was not the only potential trade news that's upcoming that we heard about this week in the NFL. Cooper Kupp also is headed out of LA after putting out this statement that the Rams, they're moving on from your boy. He said, quote, "I was informed that the team will be seeking a trade immediately and will be working with me and my family to find the right place to continue competing for championships. I don't agree with the decisions and always believed it was going to begin and end in LA. Still, if there's one thing that I've learned over the years, there are so many things that are out of your control, but it is how you respond to these things that you will look back on and remember. I have taken so much pride in playing alongside my teammates for the LA community. So thankful for embracing my family and making this such a special place for us. 2024 began one of the best training camps of my career. Preparations start now for 2025. Highly motivated, as healthy as ever, and looking forward to playing elite football for years to come. Love you guys, but coming for it all." So Cooper Kupp is available, and it might not cost that much according to a lot of the reports out there. I had a conversation with one of the listeners, David, who hit me up yesterday on Thursday being like, "I disagree with your opinion on Kupp." And I was like, okay, I don't really feel like I talked about Cooper Kupp at all, but I did mention, I guess, how T. Higgins is the apple of my eye when it comes to the possible receivers that could be available. Like, who certainly, I mean, he's a free agent, so he's absolutely going to be available. Garrett Wilson, I would want Garrett Wilson over T. Higgins, but are the Jets going to do that? And now Cooper Kupp is available right now. So I didn't really give an opinion, I don't believe. I said multiple times, we'll talk about it on Friday. Either way, I mean, appreciate David for reaching out and letting me know his thoughts. He is all in on the Cooper Kupp situation. He likes that more than Higgins. He says he even likes Rashad Bateman, potentially getting him in a trade more than T. Higgins, which I find very interesting, the Rashad Bateman piece of it all. But certainly Cooper Kupp has a history of being one of the best receivers in the National Football League. He won the Triple Crown back during the Super Bowl MVP season he had in 2021, where he had 145 receptions, 1,947 yards, and 19 touchdowns. Just stupid stuff he did in 2021. But his production has dipped between 2022 and 2024, the last 3 seasons, in part due to injuries. He's missed 18 games the past couple of years, and in 2022 had 75 receptions, 812 yards, 6 touchdowns, missed 8 games that year. 2023, 59 receptions, 737 yards, 5 touchdowns, missed 5 games that year. Then this past season, 67 receptions, 710 yards, 6 touchdowns, and again, missed 5 games. And he caught just 6 passes in the 2 playoff games the Rams played, but is set to carry a $29.7 million cap hit in 2025. So the Rams felt that his salary with $29.7 million, again, due, and then $27.3 million due in 25 and 26 respectively, that it no longer matched the performance, especially what he's did last year in 2024, especially when you have a guy like Puka Nacua, who has been a revelation since being drafted a year ago out of, I think he was at Utah by then. Can't remember. He was at Washington and he went, I believe it was at Utah. But yeah, they're moving on. He's going to be 32 this season. They think his best days are past him. Cooper still thinks that he can play elite football and that he's healthier than ever and he's highly motivated, which of course someone would be at this stage of the career after a team tells him we're moving on from him. And he has much better numbers over the last couple of years in Los Angeles than necessarily we saw from Adam Thielen when the Panthers signed him around this time a couple of years ago. So I don't know whether Carolina is looking to add 2 older receivers like Kupp and like Thielen, and then you look at kind of where guys maybe better fit as far as like Coker's probably better in the slot and say maybe Leggett there. The things get a little redundant. Now Canales has got to be obviously creative in how he's going to utilize his receivers, and they like to cross-train them, have them play in every single position, but Thielen's going to play in the slot more times than not. You're going to have Leggett at the Z. It's kind of the X receiver that they're missing, and certainly they could throw Cooper Kupp out there if they wanted to, even though that's not really been his role. Like that was more like what Robert Woods was back in the day when those 2 guys were really doing their things early on when Sean McVay was head coach, and even when they had Jared Goff as their quarterback. So this one is way more possible because of just like the Rams aren't in like cap hell, it's not going to kill them in order to get rid of Cooper Kupp, kind of like it would happen in Cleveland if they traded away Myles Garrett. He's unlikely, by the way, to fetch more than a mid to late round pick. So I saw a bunch of things on The Athletic about 4th round pick, 5th round pick, 6th round pick, 4th and 6th, just nothing. And if you're telling me you can give up the pick you got from the Giants, because again, Carolina, we're looking at day 3, their own 4th, Cowboys 5th, their own 5th, Giants 5th. They have their own 4th, Cowboys 4th, their own 5th, Giants 5th, Ravens 5th. They have 3 5th rounders, 2 4th rounders. I don't have a problem giving away any of those. Are you kidding for Cooper Kupp? So yeah, I would be down. Like if that happens, totally cool. I just think about, the other options they could have. Like if Garrett Wilson's available, I would rather have Garrett Wilson because he's a lot younger than Cooper Kupp. If T. Higgins, which looks like he's going to be available, is available, I'd rather have him because he's going to be 26 this season. Cooper Kupp's going to be 32. I'd rather have a guy who's younger, who's ascending, than a guy who's older, who's clearly declining, and it's right there in front of you that he's not someone you can depend upon to play the full season, and he's not putting up the kind of numbers he used to. Now, that's still good numbers. 800 yards, 700 yards the last couple seasons. Much better than what you're getting out of the guys currently here in Carolina. So I'm not against it, especially if it's only a 5th. Are you kidding me? Yeah, 5th round pick. Come on down, Cooper Kupp. But there are guys I would rather have that could be available at the receiver position this offseason in Cooper Kupp, who would be obviously a great addition for the Carolina Panthers. Take one more quick pause. We'll come back and I do want to address the Hall of Fame. Steve Smith Sr. and Luke Kuechly were not named into the Hall of Fame this upcoming year. We'll talk about that. And there's a question about one potential free agent who is going to be playing on Sunday that Carolina maybe could target. We'll talk about that here in just a moment on Locked on Panthers. Super Bowl 59 is here. 1 game, 2 teams, endless possibilities, and there's no better way to make every play more exciting than with FanDuel Sportsbook. Whether it's predicting the first touchdown, calling the MVP, or even betting on the coin toss, FanDuel makes it easy to get in on the action with live betting all game long. You can adjust your bets as the game unfolds and feel the thrill from kickoff to the final whistle. The live betting feature lets you stay involved no matter what happens on the field, and the app is super easy to navigate. Plus, knowing that you can place a $5 bet and potentially win $200 in bonus bets for the Super Bowl, that's the icing on the cake. Download the app or head to FanDuel.com to get started. Bet just $5, and if you win, you'll score $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com. Bet with FanDuel, official partner of Super Bowl 59. The big game is almost here, and there's no better way to make it even more exciting than with Prize Picks, the best place for daily fantasy sports. With over 10 million members and billions in winnings awarded, Prize Picks makes it fun and simple to get in on the action. Here's how it works. You pick more or less on at least 2 players' projections, and if you're right, you can win up to 1,000 times your cash. Prize Picks even has a free pick for the big game, where one of the starting quarterbacks only needs to throw 1 yard to win, so it's only 1 yard from either Jalen Hurts or Patrick Mahomes. My guess is they're going to get there. Pair that with one more correct pick, and you're cashing out. Download the app today and use code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code LOCKEDONNFL for $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks, run your game. I have one more question going to answer here on this weekly Friday mailbag edition of Locked on Panthers. But first, wanted to address the 2025 Hall of Fame class that was announced on Thursday night at the NFL Honors down there in New Orleans ahead of Super Bowl 59. Of course, we all know at this point in time that Steve Smith Sr. and Luke Kuechly will not be a part of the 2025 Hall. And I know a lot of people were upset about that. And I mean, rightfully so. Steve Smith Sr. and Luke Kuechly both are all-time greats here in Carolina, but also all-time greats in the history of the NFL and will one day be in the Pro Football Hall of Fame in Canton. Just wasn't their time for whatever reason. Like, in starting off with Steve, because I'm not really all that broken up about it. It's unfortunate. We got to see Julius Peppers go in last year, and that was a no-brainer. And for Steve to have to continue to wait, a little annoying, but it's going to end sooner rather than later. When you look at it, he's 8th all-time in receiving yardage in the history of the National Football League. 14,731. All the guys ahead of him are in the Hall of Fame or are going to be in the Hall of Fame. Jerry Rice, the all-time receiving leader by a wide margin, man. He's in it. Larry Fitzgerald, not eligible until next year. And my guess is Larry Fitzgerald will be a first ballot Hall of Famer, which can beg the question, if Larry's going in first ballot and he had over 3,000 more yards than Steve and he played, I think two more seasons, maybe. Yeah, one more season, more than Steve Smith did. And they played in the same era. So if that's the case, if Larry's going to go in and Steve's been waiting his time, wouldn't Steve go in with him? We'll see. But Larry Fitzgerald will be in. Terrell Owens, who got in a couple years ago, he played in the same era. He will be in soon enough. Randy Moss, same era played. He's in it. Isaac Bruce, basically the same era. He's in. Tony Gonzalez, the tight end. He's in there. Tim Brown, he's in there as well. It's going to happen. And you look behind him, Marvin Harrison, he got in, I think a year ago, he got in, and he had less receiving yardage than Steve Smith. Andre Johnson, who retired at the same time, got in and he played less years than Steve Smith. So maybe that's what's more impressive, because he had about 500 yards less than Steve Smith Sr., and he did that in 2 seasons, less played. And James Lofton, that's a way different era, and Chris Carter, he'll be in eventually. I would think like in the next 2 years. And then if not, then it starts to get ridiculous that he's not in the Hall of Fame. He will be a Hall of Famer. Luke Kuechly not getting in first time around is not crazy at all. And we talked about this. I think somebody asked me this about on a mailbag. I want to say it was our listener down there in Texas, Kurt, had asked about the possibility that both those guys get in. And would that be the best day in Carolina Panthers history if both of them were inducted in the Hall at the same time? Yeah, that was exactly the question. He's very similar to Patrick Willis as far as they both only played 8 seasons. He was a 7-time Pro Bowler. Patrick Willis was a 7-time Pro Bowler. Luke was a 5-time All-Pro. Patrick Willis was a 5-time All-Pro. Luke was on the All-2010s team. So was Patrick Willis. Luke was AP Defensive Player of the Year. So was Patrick Willis. I mean, all these things. Like you got Pro Football Writers Defensive Player Rookie of the Year. And that's the same thing that Patrick Willis was. Now, Luke also has AP Defensive Player of the Year, or Rookie of the Year. He also has the Sporting News Defensive Player of the Year. So 2 more accolades than Patrick Willis had. But think about this. Patrick Willis, he got inducted last year. He had to wait till his 5th year of eligibility and his 2nd year as a finalist. I think Luke will be a finalist again next year. And apparently, and Darren Gant put this on Panthers.com, they've changed the percentage that you need in order to get in, as far as you can't be outside of the 80% threshold. He had a story on Panthers.com that detailed more of that. So I didn't really look at it. I'm kind of looking at it right now. He's going to get in. It's maybe next year. That'd be great if him and Steve both get in, and it's still certainly going to be a possibility. But the Hall of Fame doesn't lose credibility because Luke Kuechly is not in the Hall of Fame right now. He'll be in the Hall of Fame one day. Same thing like Eli Manning. There's a lot of talk about whether he'll be a Hall of Famer. If you look at his numbers, not that impressive, but he does have 2 Super Bowl rings. He beat the undefeated Patriots, took down Tom Brady multiple times there, and he's a Manning, and it's in New Orleans, his hometown. So there was thoughts that maybe he'd get it. He didn't, and I think that's probably the right decision, because Eli Manning is not a first ballot Hall of Famer. It's not a no-brainer. He'll be in one day, but it's not like you don't look at Eli Manning like, oh, yeah, that guy for sure. Like Tom Brady will be first ballot, because look at what Tom Brady did. Compare that to Eli Manning. Eli needs to wait a little bit. Maybe not going to wait too much longer, but yeah, it is what it is. I don't think that's something to be super upset about, that neither Steve Smith Sr. or Luke Kuechly were inducted into the Hall of Fame this upcoming year. Now, one last question. It is about a Philadelphia Eagle who will be playing the Super Bowl on Sunday, maybe the last game he plays as an Eagle. Sam asked thoughts on someone like Zach Bond in free agency. Simple and to the point. I did see there's an article, I think it was on Cat Crave earlier or a couple of weeks ago, about the Panthers. Maybe can they afford Zach Bond? Carolina has about $20 million cap space. The Eagles are kind of like Cleveland, where they always have interesting cap situations, but they actually get good players, unlike Cleveland. Zach Bond signed a 1-year, $3.5 million contract last year in free agency, leaving New Orleans to go to Philadelphia. And this year he's had an unbelievable season, earning All-Pro and Pro Bowl honors, kind of like Devondre Campbell a couple of years ago, dude who signed for nothing, then had a hell of a year in Green Bay. And that's the same Devondre Campbell who quit in the middle of a game this past year against the 49ers. And then I want to say that Rasul Douglas, when he left Carolina, he went to Green Bay and had like an amazing year as well. And looking at Spot Track, they're saying Bond His market value is 2 years, 19 million. So just under 10 million average annual salary. So that's what the case is. I think it'll probably be more than that. That's not crazy at all. Understand though, Gerald Vero's back. Trevor Wall stepped in there and started last year. They drafted in the 3rd round. I think they drafted him with the intention that he was going to start in 2025. So I don't think he's sitting on the bench. Josie Jewell, who had his share of injuries and then had struggles earlier in the season, he played well for a stretch there in the middle to late part before he got injured. He played in this same system a couple years ago with Gerald Vero. I have a hard time believing the Panthers are going to spend money on Zach Bond, but it's possible that they could do that. Certainly. I don't think that would be their plan as far as attacking the linebacker spot in free agency. They'd probably be looking for a backup more so than a starter. And I don't know, did Philadelphia think Zach Bond was going to be this good? I mean, certainly they couldn't have, if they thought he was going to be this good, he wouldn't have got a $3.5 million contract, but certainly did they think he was going to be a starter for them this season? I don't know. But appreciate the question, Sam. We'll see how things play out in about a month's time once we get to free agency in the middle of March. But that's going to wrap up this edition of the Locked On Panthers podcast, part of Locked On Podcast Network, hosted by yours truly, Julian Council. Again, y'all subscribe, follow the show free on YouTube or wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. Be sure to follow me, Julian Council, over on Twitter at Julian Council, where next Friday I'm back answering your weekly Friday mailbag questions. All you got to do is either at me or DM me to get those questions into me right now. In the meantime, be safe, be happy, be whole. As always, keep pounding. And I'll talk to you on Monday as we begin our review of the Panthers defense, which, yeah, it was bad. We'll start off with the defensive line and see what the Panthers may do and should do with the defensive line this offseason once free agency rolls around.